Just waiting for everybody to come in. Hello, I'm Jean Hammerman, the Acting Executive Director with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, also known as CCLEAR, and we welcome you today to Past and Proposed, what the federal budget means for brownfield redevelopment. I've been anticipating this webinar and am as eager as you are to hear how the cascade of federal funding that we expected last year could be an historic deluge this year with the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, earmarks, and general appropriations. While there have been many webinars on these bills, our focus today is on how federal funding and capital market opportunities will impact brownfield redevelopment and the intersecting issues of infrastructure, environmental justice, and climate change. In total, there may be billions of dollars to support the reuse of contaminated and underutilized properties in ways that build community assets and creates jobs. Next slide. Before we hear from our speakers, I'm going to take just a moment to introduce you to CCLEAR and go over some housekeeping rules. The Center for Creative Land Recycling is the leading national not-for-profit championing equitable and sustainable land reuse. We've been working over 23 years to convert abandoned and vacant commercial and industrial properties to assets that benefit the community, creates jobs and tax revenues, and builds resilience. We are EPA's technical assistance to brownfield or TAB provider in 10 states and territories around the country. The other regions are served by Kansas State University and NJIT. We deliver a range of educational grant review and technical assistance that brings millions of dollars into communities and trains thousands of land reuse professionals each year. If you'd like to learn more about our services and how we can assist your community, please contact us and we will direct you to the appropriate TAB provider for assistance. Next slide. We heartily thank the American Planning Association Upstate New York chapter for accrediting this webinar. Those of you who are AICP certified planners can receive 1 certification maintenance credit. Please note the number and the report, the credit as you would for live events, and you must fill out the survey that will be launched at the end of the webinar. Next slide. The speakers will be using PowerPoints as they present, and they will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some informal questions and answers. It is being recorded, and you'll get a link to the recording. You will get a survey following this webinar. Check out our dashboard on the side. We have some EPA resources there, as well as today's slide deck. You can ask questions during the webinar. So to do so, type your question into the lower box of the dashboard. Send to either all participants for everyone to see, or choose to send to moderators only. I think after a year of virtual meetings, everyone's a pro at doing this. I don't expect any technical difficulties, but if we are interrupted or if you have trouble connecting, please look at the technical difficulties and audio help document that is also in your dashboard. If the visuals are interrupted but audio remains, you can download the presentation and continue to listen. Next slide. We are now going to launch some poll questions. So we'd like some information about you and your redevelopment challenges. The first poll question is, what is your role in the redevelopment process? We'd just like to get a sense of who's on the call with us today. So if you could please take a moment to fill that out, and then we will share the poll results. Okay. So state or federal agency seems to be the #1, though number of public entities with publicly owned property ready for reuse. Excellent. Poll question #2. What are your biggest challenges in securing funding for your redevelopment projects? And you can click all that apply. Please take a moment to complete that. We tried to come up with a number of different options. And again, there will be an opportunity in the survey to write in more expansively about some of your challenges so that we can learn from you and help you with your redevelopment challenges. Okay, let's close the poll. And so we see we're not aware of funding opportunities. That's a good reason why many of you here today and know how to prioritize and pursue. Excellent. And the bandwidth is a close follow-up. Thank you. And our last question: what forms of technical assistance would be most beneficial to you? If you could select one so we can understand your top priority. And hopefully the speakers will integrate some of what they're seeing from your responses into their remarks today. Okay, we can close this poll and see what the grant identification and prioritization. Okay, so that's feeds back on what we learned in the prior poll. Excellent. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce the nationally renowned speakers that we have lined up for today's webinar. First, we will hear from David Lloyd. David is EPA's Director of the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization since 2006. Prior to joining EPA, he held a variety of positions in the areas of private and government legal practice, real estate operations, and development. David will be followed by Matt Ward, the CEO and co-founder of Sustainable Strategies, a government affairs and strategic consulting firm helping communities obtain resources for revitalization. Matt has extensive experience in economic and infrastructure development, sustainability and green economy projects, federal and state government affairs, and resource strategies and advocacy. Following Matt, we will hear from Darnell Jones, the Vice President with the Council for Development Finance Agencies, or CDFA, and he will share briefly information on CDFA resources. He focuses his expertise on government affairs and CDFA publications and educational webinars. It is now my pleasure to pass the program over to David.
Thank you, Jean and Claire, very much, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly, but my intention is to give you a good overview of what we do in the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, and I'll be able to highlight a few highlights for our budget this year and our timing for our grant announcement. Next slide, please. Broadly, our office supports brownfields revitalization. We give grants and technical assistance to communities, states, and tribes, and we also educate and give technical assistance on liability protections so we can encourage investment in brownfields. And lastly, and very importantly, we provide funding to state and tribal response programs to enhance or establish their oversight of brownfield cleanups. Next slide, please. These are the different types of brownfield grants. I won't read them all off. Most of you are aware of them. We don't do each of these type of grants competitions every year. We alternate the multi-purpose and the revolving loan fund grants, but the rest we do annually. Our technical assistance training and research grants often run long, 5 years, so we also stagger that competition. Next slide, please. This is a list of the entities that are eligible to receive the grants. This is a list that is generated by the statute that authorizes the program. So I'm not going to read through these. You will have access to this slide deck. It gets a little bit confusing when you're dealing with some of the Alaska Native villages and Alaska tribes, but as I said, it's laid out in the statute. The other thing I'll say here is that the BUILD Act, which passed in 2018, expanded eligibility for many of our grant types to nonprofit entities, and that was not the case before. Next slide, please. Probably the most popular and perhaps I would say useful of our grant types are our assessment grants. They allow you to do this list that's here on the slide of activities, Some entities use them for planning. You can do that. But the bottom line is they help communities kind of bound the risk, understand what they're getting into with a particular property. And once you do that, then you will find investors and dollars coming in, because as long as they know what their risk is, many groups or many entities are willing to invest in these contaminated sites, but they have to know the risk. Next slide, please. These are the different types of assessment grants. And going forward, we usually have community-wide assessment grants as the most popular, because they're large dollar grants and the community can use it across their whole regional area. But we also do fund site-specific assessment grants. And I think probably among the most useful of our tools are the multi-purpose grants, because you can go from assessment right into cleanup with a large up to $800,000 grant. Next slide, please. Cleanup grants, very important, obviously. We know in Brownfields redevelopment that there's a dearth of cleanup money available. The most useful of these three would probably be the revolving loan fund grants, because they're large dollar and the money can be loaned to eligible entities or sub-granted. And they can loan it to private sector. So that's a very useful tool. Next slide. I think I've covered this. Next slide. The multi-purpose funding, as I said, is really, really useful. There is a cost share requirement, but it doesn't have to be in an outlay of dollars. It could be in, in-kind sort of contributions. So it could be labor, materials, and again, it allows you to go from assessment right to cleanup. Next slide. This program here, our environmental workforce development and job training, is really wonderful. It's a small program. We funded it $2 to $3 million a year. We're just getting ready to award a current round of 18. But it helps brownfield communities impacted by brownfields, to establish a workforce development program to train local citizens in the issues related to cleanup of contaminated sites. And these students graduate from these programs and go into making really good jobs, good high-paying jobs. Next slide. And this is important. I talked about it a little bit. We fund at quite a large dollar amount technical assistance grants, and these are national. There is a technical assistance provider in every region, and then we have one national one, but they can really help with many aspects of your brownfields assessment and cleanup. And they also can offer assistance with preparing a grant proposal. So that's where a lot of communities are most challenged, because it's not real, it's a lot of work. And entities like private entities like Matt Ward's, who's going to speak, become experts in this. Our tab providers also are expert in this. Kansas State University is one, and they have a web portal that seriously walks you through step by step how to fill out an application. Next slide. This is, as I said, these are the entities that provide this technical assistance by region. And you'll see Senator for Creative Land Recycling is one of them. This is the 2020 grant award summary. I had the slide, I didn't take this slide out because it's relatively similar to where we are with our current grant announcement. We anticipate announcing the FY21 selections in early to mid-May. It will be before mid-May. And we have roughly 67 million in assessment cleanup and multi-purpose grant funding. We have 47 million in Circle 128A, which is the funding that we provide to state and tribal response programs. And then the remainder is for administrative costs. Next slide. Well, there you see it. Upcoming, we'll have, we're working on the guidelines for next year's competition, and that'll come out hopefully in very early in September, giving people time to complete their applications and submit them before we all gather for the Brownfields conference, which I'll talk about next. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, this is an important issue too. In addition to the cleanup grants, we have a wealth of information on our website about land revitalization, studies, you know, tools you can use to decide whether to demolish a structure or recycle it. And what we do here is through contract funding, we provide assistance to help a cleaned up site get back into reuse. And this spans the whole of OLM's program. So land revitalization assistance is available for RCRA sites, Superfund sites, Brownfield sites. Next slide. These are our program accomplishments, which we're very proud of. I think most proud of the jobs leveraged and dollars leveraged, because these are real numbers. These aren't made up. Next slide. This is our contact information, and please feel free to email us if you have any questions or you want help, and we'll be glad to do it. And I think the last thing I'll say is if you go to brownfieldsconference2021.org, you'll see information about the Brownfields conference that is upcoming in December. And with that, Gene, I think I'm done. I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Matt Ward from Sustainable Strategies DC. We worked with Matt for many years. He's a friend and a great stakeholder. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, David. David is a great friend to me and to all communities that are working on land revitalization. I'm glad to be with my friend Darnell from CDFA and my good friends Claire and Jean and the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Okay, I'm Matt Ward with Sustainable Strategies. I was already introduced. I'm going to talk about resources for revitalization. I do believe I was just handed over control of this, and I need to get to my slide, which will just take a moment, please. Okay, here we are. That is a ribbon cutting on a technology center on a brownfield. You look all the way to the left of that picture, you'll see a good-looking young man, David Lloyd, cutting the ribbon on a brownfield in my hometown of Charlestown, West Virginia. So that was a great day. So here we are. It's spring. You know, flowers and trees are emerging. We are beginning to emerge from the COVID crisis. We still have challenges, but we're emerging. You know, from that health crisis, we're emerging from shutdown and recession. Really, we have so much potential in this country, in our communities, and we are ready for revitalization. We're ready to start thinking about how to build back in a better way. I think we're ready to revitalize, but it's not the time for us to do things the way they were done long ago, or even the way they were done, you know, before we were hit with this pandemic. We have opportunities now to make our revitalization more sustainable, more positive for action on climate, more equitable, more innovative. And so I'm excited about that, ready to get out there and move forward like I'm sure everybody else is. So those kinds of projects cost money to do. So I'm going to talk about federal resources for revitalization that can help you do these innovative, sustainable, equitable land revitalization projects in your own cities and towns. So an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, as people are calling it, was signed into law March 11th. The money is starting to move out. There is significant money that can be used for brownfields, economic development, infrastructure, and land revitalization. And I will highlight the parts of ARPA that you could use for land revitalization. Second, I'm going to talk a bit about the return right now, after a 10-year hiatus of the congressional earmarks, which are now called community projects or member designated projects. And that process is going on right now. It's expected to continue on an annual basis for the community projects. And many of those programs and accounts can be used on brownfields and land revitalization. So I'll talk a bit about that. The president has proposed his fiscal year 2022 budget. The fiscal years start on October 1. I've been in Washington for 28 years. I've very seldom seen the fiscal year start on October 1. It usually takes till Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas time, before Congress gets it all done. I guess I would be hopeful that the fiscal year starts on time, but sometime this year, we will have a whole new federal program. The president has proposed a budget. There's going to be more details on that, and I'm going to talk about pieces that can be tailored to brownfields and land revitalization. Surely everybody knows that the president has proposed a major stimulus bill called the American Jobs Plan. There is a lot of money proposed for community revitalization, brownfields, environmental justice, and many of the good things that we want to put into brownfields. You know, strong infrastructure, resilient community infrastructure, infrastructure for clean energy. I'm going to talk about that. I am not going to talk today about what was formally introduced last night in the president's address to a joint session of Congress, which is the American Family Plans Act, which is about education, childcare, and families. It's not as relevant to the topic today. And then with all of these resources, remember Carl Sagan used to say billions and billions, we're talking trillions and trillions of dollars that will be available for communities to pursue these projects. You really have to be organized to be effective. It's, as Gene calls it, it's a cascade, it's a deluge of funding. And so I'm going to talk about getting organized for resources. So with that, the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, which is now law and being implemented. So I'm going to move my dashboard a little bit so I can see. All right. So I'm going to just focus on the pieces of that very large, $1.9 trillion stimulus bill that are related to today's topic. So there's a lot of details here. I'm not going to go into detail on everything. We have other resources at EPA, other resources at CClear, my firm Sustainable Strategies, CDFA can help you with the details. This is kind of just a taster of what's there, and then you're going to have to dig deeper if you want to pursue these. So there's $350 billion for state and local governments. I thought that the animation was going to bring this all up together. I'm going to go ahead and pull it all out. Okay, 19,000 units of local government, every state, every territory, and tribes are going to receive direct funds, or some of the smaller communities will receive pass-through funds from the states, but they're guaranteed pass-through. It's not a governor's decision whether you get it or not. It will be coming through. We're gonna take a big step on May 10th. The U.S. Treasury will announce the final allocations of how much money is going to be given to each unit of local government. It's really incredible. I live in a small rural county of West Virginia that's going to get about $15 million. My hometown where I grew up, Huntington, West Virginia, has 50,000 people. They're getting $45 million, really incredible amounts of money. So the final amount that you get, the guidance on the permissible uses for this funding and the process are all coming out on May 10th, and the first tranche of half of the funds is coming out as well. So that money has 4 permissible uses. 2 of them are relevant to brownfields and land revitalization. You may use those funds to, quote, address the negative economic impacts resulting from the COVID crisis, including by supporting nonprofits and small businesses. And so if your economy on a project dragged, if your nonprofit organizations trying to do community revitalization were impacted, that money will be able to go to them. Everybody's waiting and holding their breath to see the Treasury guidance about how broad that negative economic impact use will be. I believe it will be broad. I believe it's going to give a lot of room for people to do community revitalization. Then at the last minute, the Senate inserted in, you can also use it for sewer, stormwater, water, and broadband infrastructure, all of which are used to revitalize brownfields and vacant land. Okay, the Economic Development Administration gets about $350 million a year. About 7 or 8 times that was in the rescue plan. $3 billion will be going out for grants for public sites, economic development, public infrastructure. David Lloyd knows that EDA has been a partner with EPA Brownfields for years on land revitalization, and so I do think, see clear that we have an older version of my my slides up here, which is totally fine. I know I fixed that $450,000 typo. It's $450 million will be set aside for EDA projects in tourism, travel, and hospitality. We'll see if you'll see all my typos in this slide presentation, because I think we have the second to last version. Those EDA guidance is expected to come out at any time about how to get those grants. There will be questions. The CARES Act had $1.5 billion for EDA grants. It changed the rules in which only certain highly distressed census tracts could get them to all census tracts. Everybody in America could use EDA grants. It is not known yet whether this $3 billion will follow that same rule. I would expect that it would, because the national economic emergency hit every county and every census tract, not just certain ones. And then usually the grants are 50% match. Depending on certain factors, there can be a higher EDA share. The CARES Act made the EDA share 80% for all projects. I would expect, but we don't know whether there'll be a higher grant share. Okay, so you should contact what is called an Economic Development Representative, or EDR. Every state has one. Sometimes an EDR will cover a couple states. You go to that EDA site and you can find the person. EDRs are the critical first step for getting an EDA grant. Talk to them now. Okay. All right. The rescue plan also included, frankly, at the very last minute, $10 billion for what they call critical capital projects. $10 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And the quote in the statute was to enable work, education, and health, including through broadband. Each state, tribe, and territory is getting an allocation of at least 100 million of that. California is going to get 550 million. It's a bigger state, right? So somewhere your state will have between 100 and perhaps $500 million for capital projects. Nothing to sneeze at. It will be a state decision within federal guidance on who gets those and how they're used. Treasury guidance is also coming out on May 10th on how that funding can be used and what the process is. So May 10th is going to be a big day. Okay, there is $30.5 billion for FTA funds. It can be used for operating expenses. Frankly, transit systems are in the dumps. They have been in terrible shape during this COVID. You know, their ridership is gone. Their revenues are really hurting. So I expect a lot of that will be used for kind of restoring these troubled transit agencies. But capital grants are certainly allowed. Several kinds of capital grants are certainly allowed. and 30.5 is a big number. So if you want to redevelop that transit center or that bus infrastructure in your brownfield redevelopment area, there's going to be more money. FTA is going to issue the guidance. They're required by September 2021. It may be sooner, and the funding is going to be available until it runs out, but all the way until the end of the fiscal year 24. So a lot of flexibility there. Okay, a very large amount of money, $100 million is going to the EPA Environmental Justice Grant Program to, quote, respond to the pollution and disparate impacts of the COVID pandemic. So there's always been EPA Environmental Justice Grant Program. It's got a tremendously major boost. The statute has said that you can use it to identify and address disproportionate environmental or public health harms, and it specifically mentions brownfields. This is really intended for minority, low income, and disparately impacted communities. And I'll say that EPA already had a request for applications out for their environmental justice small grants. It's not their entire program, but it's part of their program. They pulled that back, amended it, said they're going to be more money and more grants, 100 grants, 75,000 each, primarily aimed at small nonprofits. It's due June 1. They set an emphasis on the diesel emissions near ports and rail yards, climate resiliency projects, and communities impacted by the COVID. So that's all money in the rescue plan. That's real money. It's on the way. Get yourself ready. Okay, here's real money, but it's not a done deal yet. It's just starting. My apologies to C-Clear for putting their logo in the same page as a pig, but we all know what pork is. Congressional earmarks. The first congressional earmark was $15,000 in the first U.S. Congress for the Portland Head Lighthouse in Portland, Maine. It was then Portland, Massachusetts, and George Washington personally blessed it, said the federal government has a role in supporting projects like that. They continued from 1789 to 2010. Congress killed them in 2010. They're back. So members of Congress can request that the appropriations to spending committees, or in a separate but similar process, the infrastructure committees, designate funding for projects back in their home state or their home district. They're trying to get away from the term earmark. They're calling the appropriations projects community projects, not earmarks. And they're calling the infrastructure projects member designated projects. There will be two earmarking processes. They're both going on right now. So some changes in the rules. Only units of local government and nonprofits, particularly nonprofits that serve public serving roles. You know, big companies and defense contractors can set up nonprofits to stand in front of them. Those are not going to be getting congressionally designated earmarks. It's really going to be community-based nonprofits and local governments. Unlike trying to get a grants evaluation committee to pick your grant, your job is to convince your member of Congress or your senators that your project is a priority and that they should pursue it. Even if they love your project, they may have 10 other communities that are asking for the same kind of resources. You need to explain why yours is more shovel ready, more transformational, more desperately needed, or otherwise something that they should make a priority. It's basically a grant. It's like a grant, but instead of being picked by a grant selection committee and writing a big long grant application from within the agency, the Congress tells the agency, you will give grants. They were called congressionally directed grants. I will say that they can be more flexible. So the Congress is going to be earmarking the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development Office Community Facilities Grant. I'm going to talk more about it. Those community facilities resources are put out by USDA right now. So if your member of Congress gets you into a final legislative appropriations bill, you're essentially going to get a USDA grant without applying for one, except most of the ones USDA give out are primarily loans. The ones that are going to be given out by Congress are going to be grants. They're going to be better. They're going to be more flexible. That's what an earmark is. And I'll tell you that the deadline in the House is today at 5 o'clock. Actually, the deadline for the infrastructure earmarks was April 27th, and the deadline for appropriations earmarks is today. Unless you're already on it, you're not getting in those bills this year, but you can get prepared for next year. The Senate process is not opened up. Just last Wednesday, the Senate Republicans decided that they would participate. The Senate Democrats said that they're already intend to be earmarking. I will note that there are 18 Republicans who have publicly pledged that they will not participate. So if you're in a state where that Republican senator is not participating, go to your other senator or go write a grant application to the agency. As of today, the Senate has not finalized its rules, process, or deadlines. I can tell you it's going to be fast. We will hear any moment now that it's happening. Your mayor, your county executive, your nonprofit executive needs to get a hold of your Senate staff and say, we have a project that is appropriate. We'd like to get into the process, and you need to do that now. Okay, so there are 12 appropriations subcommittees. Each one of them controls some agencies. David's agency is funded by the Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee, which funds EPA, the Department of Interior, and others. And each subcommittee says there's some accounts that we control that we're going to earmark. Most accounts are going to run the government without being earmarked. There's really just a couple dozen pieces of federal programs that are going to be earmarked, and you have to fit within one of these. Without going over it in all the detail, I will say that HUD will give out Economic Development Initiative, or EDI, grants average $250,000. It does not have to meet all the HUD, CDBG, National Objective, and other fairly burdensome HUD rules and requirements. It's got to be for economic development or community revitalization. Just about every project in the world was funded under HUD EDI back in the old days when I did this in the 90s and the 2000s. And I did a lot of brownfields with HUD EDIs. I mentioned the USDA community facilities grants, only for communities of less than 20,000 population. Community facilities, civic centers, police stations, incubators, maker spaces, theaters, museums, libraries. The infrastructure to support those are all able to be funded with community facilities grants. EPA state and tribal assistance grants for water, sewer, and stormwater, 45% match on those. Right now, you go get a clean water RLF loan from your state or a drinking water RLF loan. These are going to be grants. Army Corps of Engineers, you often have a waterfront that you're trying to fix your brownfield on. You've got to do work on the water to be able to make that brownfield work. There's going to be funding for what the Corps is essentially planning. They call investigations and construction. Depending on the program, lots of different Corps programs, there's various match levels. They used to have 6 or 7 transportation accounts that they would earmark, one for bus, one for highways, one for trails. They bundle them all into one local transportation priorities. Anything that's eligible as a surface transportation project, road, bridge, rail, trail, the wide range of DOT surface transportation. This is not for airports. There's another fund for airports. These are where the big action is going to be. And then I'll say totally separate from the appropriations accounts, the infrastructure committees. We're talking about the American Jobs Plan Act. We're talking about the debate about infrastructure all summer we're going to have. They're going to earmark those bills. They're going to earmark it to try to get people to vote for the infrastructure bills. It's over in the House, right? The Senate has not decided whether they're going to do it. And they really need to decide what they're going to do about infrastructure, which is going to take all summer long before they start earmarking. Okay, so all those earmarks, get to your senators now or get ready for next year with your senators and House members. The president has proposed an initial budget, what everybody calls the skinny budget. It was about a 20-page long document saying the big numbers of Biden's funding priorities. The budget is not what ends up being in law. The Congress has to debate the budget and go into budget committees and set a budget that may reflect the president's request, may not. And then after the budget is done in the Congress, you have to go through the appropriations committees and see if the money is allocated toward those budgets. It's a long process. But the president's budget sets the tone, particularly as the budget committees in both the House and Senate are controlled by the president's Democratic Party. So we expect the full budget, which will be hundreds of pages, maybe thousands of pages, will be out in May. But here's what the president's initial skinny budget said with respect to the C-Clear webinar. I have 2 slides. The first one's very tight. I'm not going to talk about all of it, but I'm going to start with what all of us have been calling for years. The best program in government, the EPA Brownfield grant program, does not have enough money to award to highly meritorious applications. There's always more demand than supply of money. We think that David should not have a $65 million to give out a year. We think the fully authorized level in the Build Act of 2018 of $250 million should be what the Brownfield office is getting. There are others talking about $1 billion a year. And people advocating for that. David gets a bit of a headache and says, how am I going to staff that? Well, the proposal should include more staff for that office. We need more money for brownfields, and that is in the president's proposal, but he hasn't said by how much. His skinny budget said more for brownfields, but not by how much. So call your Congress members. Okay, there's nearly $1 billion. I'm sorry, this is over 8 years. Okay, Biden's. I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. This is next year's budget. Biden is proposing for next year nearly $1 billion for an EPA program to, quote, create jobs and clean up pollution and secure environmental justice. There's about 120 of that is for air monitoring and enforcement, but a lot of the other stuff is going to be for cleanup and climate positive local projects to boost the communities that have been left behind and suffering. So that's a lot of money. Not a lot of detail out yet. Biden proposes to double, that's that X2 times 2 to $450 million, funding to the Department of Interior to put out of work coal miners and fossil fuel workers who may be displaced in the economy, where we try to shift into a climate strategy to protect the nation and world, into new jobs, cleaning up the many abandoned oil wells and abandoned mines. People know that mine-scarred lands are brownfields under the law. So I do happen to know that they put this in for Joe Manchin, who said, what are we going to do when all our coal mines are closed? And so get used to the phrase, they put this in for Joe Manchin, I'll say, as a lifelong West Virginian. So a big increase in the Economic Development Administration's assistance to coal communities grants in Appalachian and Western coal regions where the power plant or the coal mine is shutting, a topic that the EPA Brownfields office has done a lot of technical assistance on. There's going to be money for economic diversification. HUD CDBG is up a significant amount in the proposal. The Tiger grants, which are now called RAISE grants, Revitalizing America's Infrastructure for Sustainability and Equity. They propose the same billion that we have this year, and an additional $110 million for a kind of smart growth planning grant called the Thriving Communities Initiative is proposed. I love that idea. I don't know, but I think it probably came from the guy at Smart Growth America, Christopher Coase, who's now an Assistant Secretary of Transportation. If you want to get a raise grant, they're due July 12th. Time to get moving. Big boost in rural water and wastewater at USDA. Big boost, up $1 billion for USDA, the REAP, Rural Energy for America program, renewable projects, energy efficiency projects in the rural areas. And then this is not as directly relevant. We're not talking about manufacturing, but new manufacturing on old brownfields is a great use of a brownfield. David has a guidebook on that at EPA Land Revitalization. They're calling about doubling the money to boost manufacturing, including the fantastic Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. And I think this is the last one on this slide. Increases FEMA. It used to be called pre-disaster mitigation. It's now called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, BRIC. Big jump in funding that's not directly relevant, except if you're doing a riverfront brownfield or you're doing a brownfield where you want to put resilient technology in, or deal with the flood hazards or other hazards that are there, FEMA may be able to help you. Okay, second slide on Biden's budget. This one's shorter. This one is focused on workforce and jobs. Proposing a very large Department of Energy program, $1.9 billion for what they're calling Building Clean Energy Projects and Workforce Program. It makes me think about the Coalfield Development Corporation in Huntington, West Virginia. David has given them EPA environmental workforce cleanup grants, or workforce grants, cleanup grants. They take out of work coal miners who go get their trained to put solar roofs on. They put on about 100 solar roofs. They have a 350 building backlog to do that. Well, there's going to be money to train people in building clean energy technologies, stringing a new smart grid, putting in electric vehicle infrastructure, things like that. Second, the Civilian Conservation Climate Corps, right? Remember FDR's CCC? Well, there's now Joe Biden's proposed CCC to get workers out there building climate smart projects. Brownfields are a great place to do that. And then there was some money at the Department of Labor. President Obama put it into place in about 2015. It got used up quickly. POWER stands for Partnership and Opportunity for Workers and Economic Recovery. If you're a community that was focused around a coal plant, a coal mine, coal infrastructure, and it's gone, we're going to retrain workers to do new jobs. So a big Department of Labor program there. Okay, going to move on to another proposal. It's not law yet. It's going to be debated all summer, the American Jobs Plan Act, or the infrastructure legislation. It is going to be a hot summer of debate and hopefully deal making, hopefully more deal making than debate. Hopefully we can see compromise on these issues and move an infrastructure package forward. Biden has proposed a $2.3 trillion American Jobs Plan Act. That is over 8 years. And I'm going to pull all these out. The first bullet is surface transportation, $621 billion. That's kind of the surface transportation that they've done every 5 to 7 years in the Congress. The last one was the FAST Act of 2015. He's proposing that. But then you move on to water infrastructure, digital infrastructure, clean power and environmental infrastructure. And then you move on even further to housing, schools, workforce. Mayor Pete Buttigieg says you can call it infrastructure, you can call it whatever you want. It's the kind of investment we want to make in the economy to build it back better. Some notable things in this list are that there is a $20 billion proposal. It does not say which agency, for a community revitalization fund for, you can see the language there, innovative community-led redevelopment projects that can spark new community activity, provide services and amenities, build community wealth, and close the gaps for communities left behind. I didn't see who's going to do it. I think David Lloyd of EPA should run that $20 billion program. That's what I think. But we'll see what the administration proposes, whether it would be at HUD or EPA or Commerce. I'm not quite sure yet. But there is money for the Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization. Over 8 years, they're proposing $5 billion for the EPA Brownfield and Superfund cleanup programs. That would be a major boost. And then he's proposing long-term investment in putting workers to use and cleaning up mine lands and oil wells, $16 billion. And then you see he's proposed for this coming budget, the Climate Conservation Corps, he's proposing it over 8 years. And then there's also $5 billion for economic development in rural and tribal areas. Lots in there. $621 billion in traditional surface transportation, and then another, $1.7 trillion in these other things. Okay, what's everybody else saying? Congress. So in the beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic, the House proposed the Moving Forward Act. It was proposed at about $900 billion. That committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, has since gone back and revised and boosted and expanded. And they have House Resolution 4 is moving in the House. I would expect passage in the House. And it's pretty much like the Biden plan. A lot of surface transportation, a lot of water, sewer, digital infrastructure, smart, clean energy infrastructure. It provides for $2.5 billion over, I'm sorry, that's a typo. That's over 5 years for EPA Brownfield. So $500 million a year. They push it from 250 to 300 to 350 to 400 to 450, over those years. I would expect that this bill is going to be melded together with the Biden Jobs Act. The House was moving on its infrastructure bill before Biden made his proposal. So that's, they're going to essentially be, nudged into each other. But the real question is, will the Biden proposal find compromise with the Republicans, who about a week ago put out their proposed response? The debate's going to be, what is infrastructure? Let's go with the traditional surface transportation, not all this broad definition of infrastructure versus the other side's debate. They proposed $558 billion for just traditional surface transportation, except for the inland waterways and ports, $17 billion. That's more Corps of Engineers. Sewer and water infrastructure, they do call for that. Water storage is going to be like reservoirs and Bureau of Reclamation and stuff where there's real danger of drought and water supply issues. So that's their counter proposal. I'll note that when you put Biden's proposal together in just these categories, he's proposing about $750 billion for just these categories. So the Republicans are proposing less for those kind of traditional infrastructure, and then Biden proposes another, $1.5 trillion on top of this kind of more traditional infrastructure. So the question is, will we see compromise? There's reports in Washington, for what they're worth, that the White House is in serious talks with the Senate Republicans. I do know that there are Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats trying to find a compromise. The talk about the compromise is that they would put kind of a more traditional infrastructure package together in a bipartisan way, and then the more kind of children, families, education, health infrastructure that Biden is calling for would be done by Democrats alone. And if it all falls apart, we'll see 50-50 votes with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie, and a lot of time spent with Joe Manchin to get to count to 50. That's what's going to happen. All right. So I just talked about, when you put it all together, I talked about trillions and trillions of dollars of funding. What do you do to get ready for that? This will be my last slide. So here are some tips for getting ready for that. I've done day-long workshops. I've done many webinars with CClear and EPA as Brownfield office on this. We can get you access to more details, or you can always call me. All right. Get a group together, get the right people from inside City Hall or County Hall or Town Hall together with significant stakeholders from outside, get them together, pick somebody to organize this, get the backing of your mayor or county commission or whoever you need to back it. You're the group that's going to figure out our local priorities, where the money's coming, when the grants are out, how we're going to message to the community and get their input. It's time to get organized. Number two, you probably have 101 priorities in your community. That's too many for anybody to manage or anybody to fund. Try to pick those, I say, 3 to 7 catalytic, transformational, game-changing, or badly needed in a neighborhood that's been neglected projects. And brownfields and land revitalization projects can be there. What are the ones that have consensus? What are the ones that will really make a difference? Where are they on shovel readiness? Do you know what it will cost? Do you know your matching funding? Do you know your timing? Do you know how to make, do you know how much the gap is so you know how much you're applying for? Figure that out. Align those with the funding that is out or coming out. As David Lloyd said, you can go to the technical assistance for brownfield, the TAB centers that EPA funds. You can go to the EPA Brownfield Federal Programs Guide. You can go to CClear. The Council of Development Finance Agencies definitely has a bunch of resources on what funding can be used for. Other organizations can help. Take your top priorities and match them to the resources, confirm them, and then have your local leadership say, here are the 5 projects that are going to make a difference, and here are the 10 grants or sources of funding we're going to pursue. Write them down, figure out how much you can get from each source, how much you need to match, what the timing is, whether you have to get into a regional plan before you're eligible to get funding from that agency. Really, you got to roadmap it out, or otherwise you're going to just read a grant application that's due in 52 days, and you're going to say, what is our project? What is our match? We have no idea what we're doing. Call the city manager. That's the wrong way to go after a grant. I always have my clients have on one piece of paper their projects and the funds you're going for. If you bump into your Congress member or your governor's chief of staff, you can say, I want you to see the things that we're working on, the things that matter, and the grants we're going for. I'm going to need your help, right? So CClear and I have done a whole webcast on putting together a matrix. Every project, here's a brownfield on the riverfront that has an abandoned railroad and a lot of stormwater problems, okay? Put together a 1-page briefing sheet. It can be front and back, but no staples. If you can't get it into 2 pages, 1 piece of paper, front and back, then you haven't figured out what the project is. What is the project? Why is it important? How far has it come? Who's behind it? What is your funding gap and what is your ask? If you bump into a congressional staffer or an EPA or any agency grant person, you want to be able to say, I'm going to email you this PDF sheet. I want you to look at it and see if this is a good match for your funding. Engage with those agency funders. Engage with the EPA regional offices and the economic development representatives at EDA and the HUD regional officials. Don't wait till the grants are due because they might not be able to talk to you much. Talk to them ahead of time, get their guidance, shape your projects and your funding applications to get ready for those. And then even with strong projects and well-done grants, advocacy matters. Get your governor and your state cabinet secretaries to back you up. Ask your congressional members to back you up. This is how you get ready. You cannot do those 8 things on the fly. You need to start now because the money's a coming. Okay, I think That's a wrap. I appreciate the time. I encourage you all to be proactive. There's a lot of opportunity to reemerge in a post-COVID world. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Darnell Moses, the Vice President for Development Finance at the Council for Development Finance Agencies. All you, Darnell.
Thanks so much, Matt. Just want to say quickly, I really appreciate the opportunity of the folks at C-Clear, Jean and Claire, for allowing me to participate in today's webinar, and also honored to be on the session with David, Matt, and Randy. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about CDFA. As you can see here, we are a membership organization made up of primarily state, county, and municipal development finance agencies to provide support for economic development financing programs. We've been in existence for about 40 years. And essentially what we do is we assist our members in the development finance arena through education, advocacy, research, resources, and networking. Next slide, please. So just real quick, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have available. A few years ago, CDFA was contracted by the EPA to do technical assistance for brownfields around the country, and so that contract ended. So we no longer provide that technical assistance. However, the resources that we gathered as a result of that process are available on our website at www.cdfa.net. And as you can see here, this is essentially a screenshot of what you'll see when you go to our website, specifically related to brownfield communities. So we have here, it's broken down into 6 key areas or 6 funding sources, where we have sort of just a conglomeration of federal financing resources. But then we also have bond resources, tax increment financing resources, tax credit resources, revolving loan fund resources, and EB5 resources, as well as a myriad of case studies. So as you know, probably as a membership organization, a lot of times some of our information is behind a paywall, but not this information. So all this information is on our website. It's free to look at. It's free to review all the case studies, the technical assistance sessions, which we did for approximately 25 to 30 different communities. All that information is on our website for your perusal and for your to review if you have questions about brownfields. Next slide, please. So just real quick, I just wanted to add, because David really, or David and Matt provided a lot of information about some of the programs that are available for brownfields. And I just wanted to just touch base on a couple that, although they're not specifically related to brownfields, they can apply. So this first program is the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or SSBCI. It is a $10 billion program that will be managed by the U.S. Department of Treasury, and it was a part of the American Rescue Plan. What this program does is it allocates funding to state development finance agencies to create small business access to capital programs. So as you can see here, there's a state development finance agency for applications to apply for the allocation from Treasury. Funding is used to recapitalize either small businesses or create new ones. And programs include capital access programs, loan participation, guarantee programs, revolving loan funds, and other types of activities. So again, I would go to our website, cdfa.net, if you want to engage in this particular tool. There is a lot of money available for each state. So if you have any additional questions, you can feel free to ask me, or again, go to our website. Next slide, please. And another tool that we are currently advocating for, and we're hopeful that will be passed through the infrastructure bill, which is Modernizing Agricultural and Manufacturing Bonds Act. So you may wonder, why is this, or why would this be necessary for brownfields? So as you are engaging developers about the types of activities that may occur on a brownfield, one of the things that may be of use is if there was a developer that was interested in perhaps putting a manufacturing facility on that brownfield. So what this legislation would do, hopefully, is it would really increase access to this tool. This is it's a tool for manufacturing companies that right now is very specifically focused, and it's capped at $10 million. Those rules have been in place for almost 40 years now. So what we're hoping to do is increase or expand the definition of what it means to be a manufacturing facility, and also increase the limitation that can be used for these projects to $30 million. What that would do is it would just open up so many opportunities for companies that have manufacturing projects that heretofore have not been included, but now can be included. And again, this would just simply be another tool that would be in your toolbox to the ones that David and Matt referred to in their presentation. And next slide, please. And that ends my presentation. Again, I want to thank C-Clear for allowing me to present today. And again, our website is cdfa.net. So please, if you have any questions at all about our programs, please visit that site. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. We did let it run a little long. It was really important information, again, that I hadn't really heard it all in one place. So we did want to make sure everything that could be put on the table. I know I'm a bit overwhelmed. I've heard from some of you as well, but certainly giddy about the opportunity. And I know I've noted May 10th and the link to my EDA EDR. I really support what Matt said about how imperative it is to identify projects ready for funding and lay the groundwork now. And again, your tab provider can support you. We don't really have time for questions, but I do want to, before we close, invite Randy Brandt with GeoSyntech and a steering committee member of the National Brownfield Coalition to share some information. The coalition is co-led by Smart Growth America and the Center for Creative Land Recycling. And we'll put some information in the chat about where you can get additional information about signing up for our mailing list and joining us as a member. Randy.
Good day, everybody, and thanks for listening today. The National Brownfield Coalition was newly restructured and revitalized last year and is due in large part to the support from C-Clear and the Smart Growth America organizations. What we do is we're a nonpartisan alliance that advocates for policies and practices that support the responsible cleanup of brownfield properties. And of course, grant funding, which has been the primary focus of today's talks, is a big part of that. Our membership is very broad. It includes public interest organizations, city and county governments, private developers, consultants. And so anybody who's interested in redeveloping brownfield properties, we encourage you to consider membership in the coalition. Our current areas of focus include EPA grant appropriations, federal agency interconnectedness, and you heard a lot about all the different federal agencies that have potential grant funding today, affordable housing and environmental justice issues. And we're currently in the process of finalizing a webinar that will air early this summer and will provide much more information and membership opportunities. The email link, or sorry, the internet link is located at the bottom of your screen. And in your handouts tab, there's a handout that says NBC one-pager final. Give you much more information on the coalition and where to go to sign up for membership. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Randy. And with that, we're going to close the webinar. For those of you who have left some messages or questions, we will respond to you, and we look forward to getting your responses to the survey so we know what kind of follow-up we should do. There was a lot of information presented today, and we know there'll be opportunities for us to connect and to share best practices going forward. All of you stay well, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.